recording on. There we go. We finished on Friday with the first half of the exclusive right to represent buyer document after we went through the close for the agreement script. And so any questions on the first half of the document that we reviewed, your ERRB, your exclusive right to represent buyer, with regards to that page 1? Comments, questions, concerns, excitements, terrors? No, it's clear. If I asked somebody to unmute, if I called on someone to unmute and explain paragraph 6 to me, could you do it? I'm not going to do that. I'm just curious if you could do it. All right.
I'm sorry, which one are we looking at? I thought we were looking at the thing you sent earlier, the anatomy of a buyer transaction, but
Not quite yet. We're going to get there, but we're working on the documentation that we worked on Friday, which
okay,
is
sorry.
The buyer agreement, right? We're almost done.
Oh, right. Oh, that's right. Okay, thanks.
Yes. Ultimately, the answer is you're having them sign it because it's in their best interest and it's helping protect them.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? If you bring away nothing else, thank you for that, Chelsea, because it's so right. And if you bring away nothing else from a conversation around the buyer consult and the buyer document, is that it's sure. Does it protect us? Does it give us information? Yes. That's not why we do it, right? The foundational reason we do it is for them. It's the service we provide to make sure that there's a deep level understanding on behalf of the buyer in terms of what they are looking for, how this process works, what we can do for them. And then when we get down to the actual document, that document is a protection for them, right? So we got down to the bottom of page number 1. And if you remember, just before we left on Friday, I pointed out that the very bottom of the document says notice. The amount or rate of real estate broker compensation is not fixed by law. It is set by each broker individually and may be negotiable between you and the broker. Now that statement appears both on the buyer document and on our listing contracts. So my first question is why? Why does that appear on the buyer document and the listing contracts?
Because as you go along, you may change the percentage.
So yes, it's a truthful statement. That is true. That's not actually why it's on there.
Oh,
Well, isn't it set by a listing agent and the with agreement with a listing agent and the client and the seller first? And again, it is negotiable, but it says it on the buyer's agreement too because it is negotiable, right?
Well, so yes, that's what it says, but why is it on there? John, give us the answer.
State law?
Because it's required by law, right? That statement, word for word, is required by law to appear on both the buyer document and the listing document. And so it's important that you know that because it's there, again, as another protection for the client, right? Clients who think that we want to make certain that clients aren't falsely thinking that commissions are set and not negotiable. Now that may seem counterintuitive, right? People who live in fear of the commission conversation, it kind of seems like we're opening up Pandora's box. Like, why on earth would you put on a piece of paper that you can negotiate my commission? Well, the reality is what I have learned about commissions, both on the list side and on the buyer side, is that most people don't.
Bring your buyers.
Most people don't negotiate those commissions if, in fact, you get out ahead of them. And so I love the fact that this is required by law because it allows me to get right out ahead of, oh, and by the way, here's how I get paid. Right? Because this isn't pro bono work, right? Unless you choose for it to be. Not my recommendation, just by the way. Right? So when you step out in front of it to say, oh, and by the way, you know, here's how I get paid. Well, it shows that you're not afraid to simply have the here's how I get paid conversation. And so the paragraph that we're moving into, which this appears just before on the buyer document, is paragraph number 7, which is the top of page 2 of the buyer document, which talks about how we get paid. Now, let me just ask a quick question. Who is responsible for paying us on the buy side? Is it the buyer or is it the seller?
Seller.
So seller. So all in favor of seller, raise your hand.
Could
Okay,
be
that-
either.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
All
I'm
in
sorry.
favor?
It could be either, right? Depends. Because if you do for sale by owner, the
Exactly.
buyer is actually has the option. You know, you have to present it to them the right way to pay it.
Anybody have a different answer?
Yeah, if the selling broker is not willing to pay a commission, then the buyer's agent would hopefully get recompensed by the buyer.
Yeah, so
They're
So-
obligated, right?
yeah, so let's get real clarity around this, right? It's why I asked the question.
Oops.
Buyers have a responsibility to pay you your commission. Period. It's their obligation. It's their responsibility. We're going to go through this whole paragraph that kind of outlines that responsibility, but buyers have a responsibility to pay you. They also oftentimes don't, because we get paid via the MLS, right? We get paid, the buyer's money comes to the table. The listing agency has an agreement with the seller who's receiving the buyer's money, and then through the MLS, we're promised a portion of that, right? That's how it normally works. But the only time that the buyer is relieved from their obligation to pay a commission is if we are able to secure it someplace else, right? Neil gave us a version of exactly that, and he's 100% right. But I'd like for you to take away from this conversation the understanding that buyers are responsible for the commission. We just often find other ways that they don't have to actually write the check. But at the end of the day, when they hire you, they take responsibility for making sure that we get paid. And it is a myth, and it's a myth that has you pedal down the wrong path oftentimes, that we always get paid by the seller. Because always always, words like always, never, right? You should refrain from using those words, because they're oftentimes it's not as sure a thing as you want to make it. So the buyer is responsible for paying our commission, and let's outline how and what that looks like. Right, number 7, buyer agrees to the following compensation agreement, which we call our professional service fee. 7A. I'm going to go through each of these, and then I'll ask for questions, but allow me to go through each of them first. 7A, the buyer agrees that the broker is entitled to a fee if during the original term of this agreement or any extension thereof, the buyer enters into a contract to purchases, or acquires a property acceptable to the buyer. If the buyer attempts to avoid the obligation under this agreement, then the buyer shall be obligated to pay the professional service fee. So 7A says the buyer is responsible for paying our fee. Period. 7B goes on to say, the broker's professional service fee shall be 3% of the purchase price of the property purchased by the buyer. If the amount offered through the MLS is less, the broker may elect to reduce the fee. If the buyer wishes to purchase a property not listed through the MLS, the fee for service is 5%. So 7A says that the buyer is responsible for our fee, and 7B quantifies it, the fee, that is, at either 3% or 5% or something else, as everyone can agree. 7C says the broker will make every effort to obtain the above professional service fee from the seller, the listing agent, the buyer broker fee from the MLS, or structured within an offer to purchase from the proceeds of the sale or transaction. So 7A says that we're due a fee. 7B quantifies the fee. And 7C clarifies that sometimes the fee isn't paid directly from the buyer to the brokerage. It is sometimes paid by this long list of other opportunities, including through the MLS, right? Which is most common, by the way. 7D, if broker receives a fee from any of the above sources in excess of the amount stated in this agreement, buyer agrees that the broker may accept that amount. So 7A says that we're due a fee. 7B quantifies it. 7C explains that we don't often receive it direct from the buyer. And 7D says if for some reason we get more money than what's stated here, like a bonus or something, that we get to keep it. 7E, the professional service fee is due no later than the date on which the title to real property transfers to the buyer. The obligation to pay a fee will automatically extend through the date of the actual closing and transfer of title, even though this date occurs after the term of the agreement or any extension thereof. So 7A says we're entitled to a fee. 7B quantifies it. 7C gives the opportunities that exist in order for us to receive it. 7D talks about getting paid bonuses and that it's okay by the buyer that we do so. And 7E is just the time frame, right, that we get paid. Any questions about 7A through E about the explanation for the buyer about how we get paid? Questions, comments, or concerns? No, not a one? My goodness, that's a first. Okay.
Wait.
This is clearly the advanced class. Yes, Barbara.
I did not know that if I was getting a lower percentage from the seller, that I could ask the buyer to make up the difference.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Right, did everyone hear what Barbara just said? That if for some reason what's offered out on the MLS is less than what you choose to accept, when the buyer has hired you, you have an opportunity to have that conversation with the buyer. Let me explain how that works, however. And I'll give you a quick example. In 2004, the market was moving very, very quickly. I was working with some buyers all through the spring. I sold them 6 houses. We only closed on one. I only got paid on the last one, but I sold them 6 houses. The first 5, we had accepted offers that either they stepped away from the day after because they got cold feet, because it was another market kind of like today, where it was like throw as much money as you possibly can at the seller as quickly as you possibly can, and hope that your offer is chosen. And so we went through a couple of issues there. We had 2 inspections that yielded really major problems. That was just kind of bad luck or poor timing. And so we got to the point of property number 6, and it was a property on Bald Hill Road in Wilton. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I called and said, hey guys, a house just came on the market that you will buy. This is your house. I now understand why those other ones didn't work out, because this is the house you're supposed to buy. Leave work now. I will meet you there in 15 minutes and we'll get that taken care of. I'm pushing the button on the email now so you can look at it. But again, don't spend time in your office looking at it. Get in the car and drive here, because we need to get into the house to make the offer. I said, and before I let you go, let me make this statement. This particular property suffers from cheap seller syndrome. That's what I called it. Cheap seller syndrome, which means what they're offering out as my compensation is below my standard. And so if in fact this is a property that you expect to purchase, before you even get here, I want to be clear that I am going to have to ask you for an additional %. And they said, of course, if this is the house for us, that only seems fair. Great, get here. So they got there, we walked in, they said, oh my God, this is the house we want. We wrote the offer, they bought the house. And how I got paid at the closing was 2% came via the MLS, right, through the transaction, through the listing agency from the seller. And they brought an extra 1% made payable to my brokerage. And I took both of those checks and handed them into my office, and that's how I got paid. That is an opportunity, right? That is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity that a lot of buyer's agents don't know that they can do or aren't comfortable doing. Trust me when I tell you, if this pops up, I wasn't about to all of a sudden, after selling them 5 other houses, accept only 2%. That was not where I was going, right? The reality is, if it came on in the MLS at 2.5, I maybe would have just said okay to 2.5, because my standard was 2.5. If I got 2.5 through the MLS or however else, I didn't ask for people to make up the difference between that and 3%. My contract said 3%, but I accepted 2.5. Right. And so the idea that this one came along and was offered out at 2, I thought, oh, I don't think so. Right. Here's the trick. The trick is, you need to have this conversation prior to them viewing the property. Right. If they arrive in the property and say, oh, my stars, this is the best property ever. I can't believe it's the thing we want. How do we write up an offer? And then you have the conversation. Oh, by the way, you're going to owe money if in fact you want this one. That's not fair. My personal opinion is, once they step foot on the property, you've lost your opportunity to have that conversation. Because what they need to be able to do is they need to be able to decide not to see that property if they are not comfortable writing the additional check, right? That has to be their choice, right? If all of a sudden commissions dropped for half the inventory in the MLS, do you have an opportunity to show the ones that are higher commissions and leave off the ones that are lower commissions? Please say no. The answer is no, right? Once you've signed this document with those folks, you have to behave in their best interest first. It's not about how much money you get paid, right? And what I'm telling you is, there's another opportunity here, that it doesn't have to be about what you get paid per se, because if you so choose, you can have that conversation with the buyer and have them make it up at the closing. Make sense?
So Rick, I want to get a little clarification on that, because
Yes, ma'am.
I struggle with this, because I've got some buyers and I've stumbled across a few properties that could work for them, but it's like 1% buyer's commission.
Yep.
So I've been like, all right, what do I do with this? I mean, I did end up sending it, but it sounds like you're saying I could send it and say, just so you know, if we see this and you like it, you'll have to make up the difference in commission, right? Or however you phrase that. So I'm allowed to do that.
Yes, absolutely.
So what if they say, yeah, we're not into that, but we want to see it anyway? I mean, I can't refuse, right? It's a fiduciary duty thing. Like, what would you do in that scenario?
Well, the reality is, they signed a contract that says that you get paid 3%.
Got it. Okay, got it. Okay, good. Perfect.
So they could refuse, and that would be
And then I
problematic.
can point that back out. Okay.
Right? And now I'm not saying make sure that you have confrontations and contentious conversations with your buyers. That's not what I'm saying. However, the conversation I think I would have in the scenario that Margaret just put on the table is, again, as you're sending the 1%er, you get to say in a phone call, not via text or via email, right? In a phone call, hey, I just sent you a new house, and I wanted to just bring to your attention that particular house, again, I called it cheap seller syndrome, because I like to kind of, I infused a little bit of humor. I also kind of like to push the blame on the seller a little bit, right? Because that to me is the seller being a little bit cheap. So it suffers from cheap seller syndrome, which means they're not offering a substantial enough commission for me that it meets the criteria of our contract. And so I need you to understand that if this one is the one that you choose to view and purchase, we will have to have a conversation about you making up the difference, right? I'm happy to kind of to work with you. They're offering 1%. Our contract says 3%. I'm happy to accept 2.5, which means you'll have to bring 1.5 to the table. Or if that's not acceptable to you, you need to allow me to write into the offer that the offer is X, and the seller is going to need to pay this much to the buyer's agent, right? We can write it into the offer and see if we can manipulate the seller and the listing agent to change my commission, knowing it's in the offer. We can do it either way.
So that was my other question. So if they did agree, I assume we'd still have to write it in there that the buyer will pay the buyer's commission, the additional 1.5, right? Or how would that work?
Well, so it doesn't have, if they, when they understand that they've already signed a contract to that
Okay.
effect, they've already signed a contract to that effect. So it doesn't have to be in the, unless they give you the okay to write it into the offer, right? Which, just by the way, your buyer has to okay that, right? I've already handled some issues where the buyer's agent saw that it was a lower commission and wrote out the offer, and then just told the buyers, or worse yet, didn't tell the buyers that they were writing in the offer that the commission needed to be higher. That if they don't okay, if the buyers don't okay that, that puts them clearly at a disadvantage in their offer, right? So you've got to really be cautious and make sure that they're on board with that. Yes, Donna.
So I hope you agree. This conversation with your buyer about the additional percentage that they're going to write a check for goes so much better if it starts with, remember when during our buyer consultation, we talked about how I got paid and I covered what happens, okay? So it's not the first time they're hearing it. For God, please do that. Do it at the buyer consultation the first time. So this is just a reminder. We're now in one of those situations. Just a word to the wise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Remember, we talked about the fact that this document, the presentation of this document, feels like an ambush if you haven't set the stage early that this is what's going to happen. This is another example that Donna just gave of the exact same thing. This conversation to them feels and sounds like an ambush if you haven't already set the stage that that was a possibility. And if you go back to your setting your close for the agreement script, your close for the agreement script, if you're following the process, says very clearly in the 4th paragraph, by the way, there may be some circumstances such as me showing you a for sale by owner or a home that for some reason or another is offering little to no compensation to the buyer's agent. In circumstances like those, you may be asked to pay for a portion of or the entire commission. However, we will discuss any of these homes first prior to you seeing them so that you fully understand your obligations should you choose to pursue those few exceptions. Right? Do you remember when we went through that on Friday? Now, for many of you, you listened to that and heard it and didn't quite understand why it was in there. That's why we then go through the document line by line and then go back to this script so that you have clarity around why things like that are part of the script. Does that make sense? So now, so again, in Margaret's scenario, it's unlikely to me that you used this script when you had the consult with those buyers. So it may be the first time that they're hearing this, right? So you need to be really cautious around how you approach that, right? When you utilize this script and this process, it's not a surprise because then, as Donna said, you can start with, hey, do you remember we talked about this phenomenon that sometimes exists called cheap seller syndrome? Well, it's occurring on this particular property, right? Do you remember when we spoke about the opportunity that you might have to make up some of the difference for the commission to be paid? Now, for a lot of you, this whole conversation is like giving you hives, right? I can see it in some of your faces. Like, oh goodness, how could I possibly ever ask a buyer to pay my commission? Guys, remember that's an expectation that you have to set, right? It's a hiring conversation when they sit down with you. You've set the terms about how you get paid. They've now signed a contract about how things can work. So don't hide from how you get paid. Don't hide from your commission. However, do it in a way that doesn't feel like an ambush. Because if it feels like an ambush, that doesn't work for anybody. Trust me, I've done it that way. Where all of a sudden everyone's looking at you like, I'm sorry, what? Right? If it was being texted, it would be like the WTF text. And you can see it in their eyeballs. However, when you set the stage properly and then just simply go back and say, hey, this is one of those opportunities that I mentioned. Even if they don't remember it, they can always go back to the contract. They can kind of search their little data banks and you just reminding them that you had a conversation around it, even if they didn't remember it on their own, right? They then believe you that you had the conversation around it. So really, really important. Thank you, Barbara, for pushing us down this bunny trail, because it's a really important bunny trail to go down, right? And get clarity around the fact. That's why I started by saying, remember, buyers are responsible for you getting paid. And oftentimes they are relieved of that direct obligation, yet they are responsible for you getting paid. Any other questions on paragraph number 7, or on that in particular?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the people I was working with, where I was just getting a 2% commission, towards the very end, after they'd already gone through the negotiations, she emailed me and she was very upset because she reread the contract and realized that she could be responsible for another percentage. So I told her, so listen, I didn't bring that up to you before this all took place, but I didn't know I could. And I didn't know I could really until you just said this. So I just said, you know, I'm not going to put you in that position. I accepted this just the way that it is. So I'm not going to worry about it. But boy, that's a lot of money to let go each time you do that.
Yeah, well said, Barbara. And to your credit, I think you made the right decision, right? Because if you didn't give her the heads up on the 2% beforehand, then it's not fair at the end to come back and say, oh, by the way, now that you've spent money and you've done your inspections, you're going to owe me an extra $5,000, right? We're not talking about $50 here. We're talking about thousands of dollars. So the decision that you made to not push on that because you hadn't done it ahead of time is exactly what I believe the right decision to be. And Barbara makes a really, really important point, guys. If you look at that, if you just accept whatever comes your way every single time, you start adding that up, it's an enormous amount of money, right? And again, where businesses you're in business to make a profit, right? Profit matters. So recognize that you have this opportunity, but again, you have to do it in the right way. Number 8, statements required by law. 2 things: lien rights. The real estate broker may be entitled to certain lien rights. We have lien rights on the buyer side. We have lien rights on the seller side. Anybody know what those lien rights say? Right. So luckily, some of you who haven't taken the Connecticut test yet, you should probably know this because it's definitely on there. Others of you who have already taken the test, good thing it wasn't one of your questions. So lien rights are delivered to brokerages in the state of Connecticut if, in fact, based on a certain set of circumstances or a certain set of facts, we can legitimately, based on our documentation, claim a commission that then the buyer or the seller, depending on what side we're on, chooses to ignore and not pay us. Right? We have certain rights that say we can go and put a lien on property that we can then sue against to make sure that we get paid. Here's what I can tell you. Right now, it's starting to click back in. I can see the light bulbs going off. So the idea is that's great. First and foremost, the lien laws in the state of Connecticut are terribly, terribly written. Right? It's like you have to be psychic to know that, you know, if you're on the listing side, you have to know at least 3 days before the closing that someone's not going to pay you 3 days from now in order to put a lien on it to make it valid. If you don't do it, if you do it within 3 days, or you know, it's not as valid. So there's lots of silly rules about our lien rights. Here's what I would encourage you to do instead. However, so somebody asked me in 21 years how many liens I've put on a property.
How many liens have you put on properties, Rick?
John, you want to give him that answer? Zippo, big goose egg. That's exactly right. Right? 0. Here's what I would encourage you to do instead. Just continue to create really powerful relationships with your clients so that you don't have to pedal down that path, right? And that doesn't mean that you'll never have a fight, right? That doesn't mean that there won't be disagreements sometimes. However, disagreements where you can sit down face to face or Zoom to Zoom with somebody and say, hey, you know what, this seems like it's going sideways. Let's talk about what's going sideways and figure out how we correct it. That to me is a far better path forward than waving around this. If you don't behave differently, we're going to put a lien on your house, right? What does that solve, right? It's only more contentious. So it's, if someone's upset and then you wave that lien rights thing around, that doesn't make them less upset. That's at least been my experience, right? So I would encourage you, be better, right? Be better at what you do and continue to create more powerful relationships, so that the whole idea of someone going sideways on you, trust me, if it hasn't happened to you, it will happen to you. If you practice long enough and with enough volume, someone will decide not to pay you at some point. The very first time it happened to me was on the listing side. I had listed a condo in Casagmo in Ridgefield, and I then decided I wanted to buy it. And so I said to the seller, look, I actually want to purchase your property, and I'll pay you the asking price that we determined. This was after it was on the market for 30 days or so. I said, and if there's anything that you feel is kind of funky about me purchasing your property, it's okay. I'll go and buy a different property. There were a bunch of 1-bedrooms on the market at the time. It was the very first investment property I ever purchased. The reason I wanted hers is because I wanted to get her sold because she needed to move on. She was headed out, and we weren't getting the offers that we thought we would get. So I wanted to perform for her. I wanted to then also inherit the tenant that I had put into her unit, because I knew he was a great tenant. So I thought, if I buy this one, I know the tenant, I put him in there, so I can inherit him and then not have to worry about finding a new tenant or inheriting somebody else's tenant that I didn't vet, right? So there were a whole lot of reasons I thought it was a really good idea. She thought it was a great idea until we got to the closing. It was the one and only time I didn't attend one of my closings. I actually was in London, and my attorney had power of attorney to close for me. And she got to the table and said, well, I'll close, but I'm not paying this commission. And my attorney said, well, why aren't you paying the commission? And she decided that now all of a sudden she was upset that I bought it, that I had to have cheated her. Clearly the price we put on it was designed to again, and no one else was buying it. I paid her full price. I went out of my way to have a conversation around it. And I was at Century 21 at the time, and we had this thing called the seller service pledge at Century 21. And there were nine items for the seller service pledge. And she brought that to the closing table and said, I think he only did 4 of these, so I'm willing to pay him 4/9 of his commission. And so I got this phone call in London saying, here's what's going on. And I said, well, then refuse to close. And he said, well, you can't really refuse to close as the agent. I said, no, I'm the buyer. So I'm refusing to close as the buyer. My attorney thought that put me in jeopardy for a number of other reasons. So he said, you know what, close, I'll just hold the commission in escrow, and we can fight about it when you get back. Okay, great. Well, we fought about it. We fought about it for so long that I actually left Century 21, opened the first Keller Williams office in the state of Connecticut. And a year after that, so 2.5 years after we actually closed, I got a phone call from my old broker saying, hey, you know what? Some attorney's office just called saying that they have 4/9 of a commission from like 2.5 years ago. What do you want me to do with it? And I thought, oh God, at this point, who cares? I just accept it and pay it to me. So my point is, if you practice long enough, something will go sideways where all of a sudden someone makes a weird decision on you, right? Had I had a better relationship, and had I been there, right? I think I could have worked it through had I been there. Had I had a stronger relationship with her, I perhaps could have addressed this issue and not been caught with only 4/9 of my commission. But that's lien rights, just in case anyone ever asks you what lien rights are. That's what that's there for, right?
Can I ask you one quick question about that? Sorry.
Yeah.
So let's take a scenario where you were not the buyer. I don't even understand how this could be an issue that you would need a lien if you have a signed contract, they were going to pay you a certain commission. How can a buyer or a seller come to the table at closing and say, I'm not going to do it? Like, I don't get it.
Well, so might they have other contracts that seem to say that they need to pay differently? Sure. Let me ask this. How many of you drove today? Any place? Right? How many of you drove at least 1 mile per hour over the stated speed limit on any road that you drove on? Right? And so the same thing could be said there, right? The rules and the law say that we're supposed to go 25, but we're going 36 because 25 seems silly, right? That's just a decision that we made. And yet we did violate some rule, code, law, whatever. Sometimes people make decisions and they're okay with living with the consequences, even if that means they will lose, right? People are allowed to make bad decisions. One of the things you should also write down, because it doesn't appear anywhere in your materials, is people are allowed to make bad decisions. And sometimes we get caught in the middle of that. Does that mean that we then can go back and say, okay, well, excuse me, you have this contract, right? I'm in the middle of 2 of those right now with buyer contracts. And here's what's real. What's real is it's easy to say, well, then just sue them. You know, they breached their contract, or they have sue them for the specific performance of that contract. Those are easy things to say out loud. However, in this country, they're not free and they're not simple, right? So what that requires is an attorney, and it requires an attorney to file suit, and it requires then following up on those suits, right? And it requires all the time, effort, and money that almost never comes out the way you expect it to, right? It's lovely that we put all this stuff in these agreements. What I find is that when we pursue buyers for cheating on us, which we do, it almost always ends in some kind of a settlement. Almost always. One time in 21 years, we've actually gotten to hiring attorneys. Well, that's not true. We've gotten to hiring attorneys a couple of times. One time, the attorneys actually showed up in court. And the very first time we showed up in court, before we got to a judge, we settled, right? So the reality is, don't think that just because people should do something that they will do something. Does that help with that, Margaret? It may be disappointing, and yet that is a reality. And so you have to remember now, right? This slaps us right back, because it's a slap in the face that this is still a business, right? And business in America is not always pleasant. Business in America is not always smiles and chummy. Sometimes it's mean and nasty. And you get to choose how you run your business. You get to choose how you pursue things that happen to you from the outside that may feel mean and nasty. But the reality is it's not always peaches and cream. And sometimes we have to deal with the fact that it's not always peaches and cream. Does that make sense? It's just one of those business realities that, you know, it is what it is sometimes. The good news is, especially when you make the choice, that for the most part, we don't deal with that very often. Well, I do, because there's 513 of you, and you know, stuff happens. But you don't deal with that as very often in the course of a year, right? Because you're good at creating those relationships and setting standards in your business for service to make sure that these kinds of things don't happen. Go ahead, Chelsea, and then we're going to push forward on it.
If need be, can you take that to small claims court?
So small claims court will be for $5,000 or less.
Right. So if it was under that threshold?
Yeah, I think if it's under that threshold, sure. But here's the thing: you can't do anything because the contract is with me. right? The context is with the brokerage.
Okay, that's
so
what
when-
I'm wondering.
Yeah,
So
so when
can't
these
even
things
represent
happen,
a
you and
side.
I need to have a conversation around what the best path forward is. And I'm not even sure. Is Effie on the call? Yes, she is. Do you know the answer to this, Effie? If small claims court is a $5,000 max and the commission due is 10,000, can you still bring it to small claims court claiming only 5,000,
Oh,
even if the commission was supposed to be 10?
yes.
You can claim the limit in that
Right.
court, but why would you forego the other 5?
Yeah,
I mean, you
agreed.
might as well pay the filing fee, which is slightly higher to file a complaint in state court.
Yeah, agreed. That popped into my head that if it was even allowable, and I just curious to know that.
Right, but Effie, as a state, if you go to the state court level and you're technically an LLC or a corp, don't you have to be, you do then have to be represented, right?
You can handle any matter pro se, but you wouldn't have standing even as an LLC. Would I guess if the contract is in Rick's name, then he would have to bring the suit either way.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for
And-
the clarification.
And my understanding is that in the state of Connecticut, there are certain incorporated statuses that do require representation that is not you. So that, because I've had that issue before where I decided I was just going to represent myself and was told back by the court clerk, you can't do that because you're a whatever. I forget what the status was. So there are
but with
certain statuses.
Just the caveat that I'm not admitted in Connecticut as an attorney, I'm only admitted in New York.
Yeah, so that's why I followed up with in Connecticut.
Okay.
I think that's the case. There are some quirks in Connecticut that would allow you not to do that. All right, so 8B, fair housing. This agreement is subject to the Connecticut General Statutes prohibiting discrimination in commercial and residential real estate transactions. Now, if you look under number 9, it states in full the language that is required by law regarding fair housing. Let's have a conversation around fair housing, right? How often do you need to abide by the fair housing statute?
Always.
That's a great question though, but I think isn't there special circumstances when there's someone owner occupant or they're like a landlord?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so let me re-ask my question. How often do you, licensee,
Always.
have to abide by fair housing
Always.
laws?
Even if we're representing a landlord.
Correct. The answer is always. You don't have an out. You don't have an exception, right? So as a licensee, your rules are stricter than many of the clients, right? And so I want to spend just a bit of time on fair housing because it is a hot button at the state level right now because there continue to be issues regarding fair housing. Now it is true that most of the fair housing issues that pop up on what side do you think? Sales or rentals?
Rentals.
Rentals.
100%, right? Most fair housing issues pop up on the rental side. However, there are issues that pop up on the sale side, right? And so you need to recognize, one of the things I want you to be prepared for is that you deal with the general public, right? Your buyers and your sellers are the general public. And the general public sometimes does and says things that are kind of jaw-dropping. And you have to be ready and able to kind of meander your way through that scenario. I'll give you two quick examples. The first, very early in my career, I had met a buyer who called in on a property, and he was moving from the Bronx up to Connecticut with his family. And so I met him in the office. We had a consult. In the consult, we had a conversation around, because if you notice, the script says, furthermore, this document goes on to explain that at all times I must abide by both federal and state fair housing rules, which means I may not be able to specifically answer some of your questions. However, I'll always guide you to a resource that can, right? remember, sometimes people ask you questions that even if it's not necessarily a fair housing issue, there are things that you get asked that are just bad ideas for you to answer. Can anyone give me an example of that? What's a question someone might ask that are just, even if it's not a fair housing issue, are bad ideas for you to answer?
What are the best school districts in the area?
Yeah, exactly, right. So questions about schools. When I worked in Ridgefield in my early days, and we had 6 elementary schools. And one of the things people would always ask is, which is the best elementary school district? I want to buy in that one. Right. And so how I answered it was, look, I have friends and clients who live and have their children go to school in each of the 6 districts. And each of them would arm wrestle you to the ground to prove that their one is the best one. So if that gives you any kind of comfort, great. If not, let me find you a resource where you can ask some questions. Let's go to the Board of Education and see what kind of testing scores they might have, right? Let's see if the superintendent has any words of wisdom for you. Let's give you a resource that isn't me to help you make some decisions there. Right. I one time had a buyer ask me about a specific high school baseball program for their son. And I thought, I have no idea. Does Ridgefield High School have baseball? Yep. Do they have that specific program? I have no idea. And so we offered them a resource and we drove them to the Board of Ed, and they got out, I got out, we walked in and we asked that question, and what they found out was no, Ridgefield High School did not offer that program. However, the people at the Board of Ed were able to tell them that like Westport and somebody else did offer that program. And it was important enough to them for their son that we changed course, and they went and bought a house in one of the school districts that actually had that program, right? But that wasn't me saying yes or no, or, you know, I'm certain it'll work out or whatever, right? Those things don't work so well when you guess. What if somebody said to you, what's the crime like in Stamford? What's the crime like in Reading? What's the crime like in Wilton?
Can't you, I think the right thing to do is to direct them to information, right? You can't tell them, because that's steering. You can't say the crime rate is better in this area than this area. So I think you have to just kind of like provide them with information.
Well, so yes, the idea would be to get them to a resource, right? Because frankly, you don't know enough about the crime in each and every specific municipality. You don't know about where they're coming from versus where they're coming to, right? You don't know what their standards are, right? So it's difficult for you to have a conversation in something that you're not well versed in, you're not an expert in. So for me, that looks like great question. Let's stop by the police station and you can ask some specific questions. We can also point you to some resources online that may give you some of that information, right? Have them Google, what's crime like in Stamford, Connecticut, right? And stuff pops up. I like driving them right to the police station where they can ask a whole bunch of different questions, right? So be careful about what you represent that you know when you maybe don't. Something as simple as, gee, can we put a pool on this property? Right? And you're standing on the back deck, looking out across this massive acres worth of lawn. I will tell you, if you stand at the back door at my house, I don't have a full acre's worth of lawn in my backyard, but I have a really flat, I have like one of the 3 properties in Ridgefield that actually has flat land in the backyard. And it's pretty expansive. To stand in my house and look at my yard, you would think, of course you can put a pool in there. Nope. My septic system is right in the middle with fields that go in all the different ways. So you can't put a pool back there unless you literally move the septic system, and still then you'd have to push it all the way to almost to the property line, right? So it's easy to take a guess at that and say, well, there's plenty of room, I'm sure we could put a pool. You'd be wrong at my house.
You'd have to make an outhouse, Rick.
Yeah, indeed. But a pool's not that important to me, trust me. I'm going to keep my indoor plumbing, thank you. Especially as we head into winter. So the idea of you guiding them to resources like the town, like the police department, like the school district, all those things keep you safer. Let me get back to my friend from the Bronx. For my friend from the Bronx, he came and met with me. We had a whole consultation. We went through this conversation, right? We went through the conversation in that there are things that, based on fair housing laws, that I cannot and will not answer for you. However, we can get you to a resource that can. And so we drove to house number 1. Literally my first 10 minutes with this guy, pulled up the street. There was a line at the house. There was someone already showing the property. And so when someone's already showing the property, what do? You wait your turn, right? So we decided, all right, I'm going to drive you down to the end. So the cul-de-sac, I'm going to drive you down to the end of the cul-de-sac, loop around, and then come back and park across the street from the house. So you can just see the rest of the cul-de-sac, and then we can wait our turn. So we do that. We pull across the street, we park, put the car in park, and the very first thing this guy says to me as we sit and wait for our turn in the house is, so I assume they're all white on this street, right? And so I turned and I looked at him and I said, well, by that, I assume you mean the colors of the houses. And clearly you can see there's a blue one and there's a yellow one and there's a white one and and he got really upset with me. And he said, that's not what I was asking. And so I got kind of just upset back. And I said, I know exactly what you were asking me. And besides the fact that that question is personally offensive to me, we just had a conversation less than 10 minutes ago about practicing fair housing. What part of that question do you think fits into a fair housing conversation? And he said, well, you don't understand. That's very important to my buying decision. And I said, I understand. So here's what I can suggest to you. I will drive you to the end of the street and drop you off. If you would like, you can go and knock on every single door on this street and see if this particular street meets your standards. I will pick you up in the cul-de-sac. Is that something you'd like for me to do for you? Well, that didn't go over well either. And so instead of having a continued shouting match with this particular person, I chose that we were just not a match. If in the first 10 minutes, that was the first question that came out of his mouth. So I said to him as he's yelling, I said, I am so sorry to have wasted your time. It seems like we're not a good match. And so I'm going to drive back to the office now, and you can engage someone else to help you find real estate in Ridgefield. Well, he screamed at me the entire 10-minute drive back to the office. We finally pulled in. I got out of the car. He got out of the car. He gave me the finger. He cursed me out. He did all these wonderful things. And I just waved and said, have a nice life. That was my first experience. My second experience was as a listing agent. I'm going to tell you both of these stories because, again, I want you to understand that sometimes things come out of people's mouths that you need to be ready for them, right? The world is a weird place, and sometimes people say things. I don't know if well, I'll tell you the second story. And so I was listing agent on a property up on Hussars Camp Place, and I had listed this property that was owned by these two older folks. He was a former SEC attorney, and she was a former something I can't remember now. And they had this quirky kind of Georgian style house. It was on the market for $900,000. It was a gorgeous house, but it was weird and quirky. And for that much money, there was only 3 bedrooms, 1 on the first floor, 2 on the second floor. And so, it was just a little quirky. And so we were having a struggle finding a buyer for it. And so I would do open houses there, and they would oftentimes, because they had 4 crazy dogs, like big, crazy, like bouncing off the walls type of dogs. And so they felt it best that they were home so that they could control the dogs. Even though we had encouraged them to find a place for the dogs to be, like, what if you took everyone out? Well, it just didn't go over well. So they stayed for the open houses, which, you know what? Okay, whatever. These people were so convinced that the buyers for their house, now listing agents this will sound very, very relevant to you because, or familiar, that's the word I was looking for, familiar to you, because so many buyers in Fairfield County, Connecticut, when their house doesn't sell, are convinced that they're waiting for the same people. And it's the gay couple from New York. These people were absolutely convinced that the only people who were going to buy this house was a gay couple from New York. Now, I hadn't thought at the time to ask them, I'm curious, are you a gay couple from New York? Because they lived there. They weren't a gay couple from New York, right? It kind of just dawned on me that that probably would have been a great question to ask them at that time. That's all right. I'm about 20 years too late. So they would tell me all the time, what are you doing to find the gay couple in New York? What are you doing to, not are we advertising in New York? What are you doing to find the gay couple in New York, right? Apparently there is one gay couple in New York who is supposed to buy every property in Fairfield County. Everyone's waiting for. I wish I could find this one gay couple, and I hope they have a lot of money. So we're at this open house. It was not terribly busy at this open house. Red, like no one was there. And I had to sit with these people for an hour and a half. And finally, after an hour and a half, they had this big, long gravel driveway. And so they hear, we all hear, tire treads on the gravel driveway. And so we think, oh, my stars, like someone's actually here. Great. Well, before I could even stand up, she gets up and faster than you could say gay couple from New York, she was at the window, peering out, looking at who it was. And it just so happened that two men got out of a sports car. And she was elated. She turns, she runs back to us, and she says, Arlen, that's her husband's name. Arlen, queers, they're in the driveway. Queers are in the driveway. Oh, goodness me. Now, whether this was a gay couple from New York or not, I have no idea. I didn't ask them. They didn't present their gay couple from New York card when they signed in. So I had no idea if they were actually a gay couple from New York or not. The bottom line was they didn't like the house and they didn't buy the house, right? So it didn't matter if they were or they weren't. Why am I telling you these stories? I'm telling you these stories because, again, I want to arm you for the stuff that sometimes happens. People just say crazy stuff. The reality is, in that first scenario, today, I would be better equipped to have more of a conversation and not be, I transparently, I was very reactionary when he said that to me. I probably wasn't as professional as I needed to be. I would have still done the same thing and decide that he and I were not a match. I would have done it perhaps in a slightly less contentious way, right? And yet, I tell you these stories because fair housing is a real thing. Fair housing issues, because you deal with the general public, are real things. And you need to be prepared for how you'll navigate through some of those conversations and some of those things that may be asked of you. Neither of those stories is made up. They're real things that happened to me in my first 18 months or so in the business. So for what it's worth, recognize that stuff pops up, right? Any questions, comments, concerns about fair housing that we should talk about?
What if you're both now? An agent and a landlord, and taking care of the renting of your own properties?
Yeah, so what I would say to you in that scenario is be massively cautious.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we follow the fair housing laws per usual as the landlord already, but I just didn't know if there was a different step or something. Do you have to disclose that you're a real estate agent?
Yes, every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whether you're a landlord, a tenant, a buyer, or a seller. You have to disclose it and you have to put it someplace in writing. When I buy properties for myself, I stick it in the offer. Buyer is agent, right? Even though I say to the listing agent, I'm representing myself, I write it right in there so no one can ever say I didn't say it. If you're a listing agent, it has to go in the remarks on the MLS, right? That's a code of ethics thing. You always have to disclose your licensee. And remember, once you're a licensee, until you're not a licensee, you're always a licensee. You can't pick and choose the scenario that in this scenario, I'm not going to be a licensee. Nope. It's like being pregnant. You either are or you're not, right? There's no in between, right? So just recognize that. And of course, number 9, buyer agrees to pay any costs and attorney's fees which may be incurred by broker to collect any monies due to the broker under this contract. Number 10, dual agency. Buyer understands that broker represents sellers in addition to buyers. And if that would be the case, then dual agency or designated agency might be the case. And we would have a conversation at that point, right? And then the buyers sign and you sign. In this scenario, you are the authorized agent. I don't sign your buyer agreements. And that is the buyer document. Questions or concerns about the buyer document? So what I encourage you to do is, now that we've been through the buyer document, and I appreciate you allowing me to kind of go through that line by line, but do you see how it brings up conversations about fair housing, about lien rights, about commissions, that without going through that document line by line, we oftentimes wouldn't get to those conversations, right? So I appreciate you allowing me to. I know it's lengthy and I know it's a little bit boring, but it brings up real issues because of the statements that are in that document. What I encourage you to do when we finish tonight is go back and read through. Because of time, we're not going to do it. Go back and read through the close for the agreement, step 6 in your buyer consultation scripts. Because now that you heard it once Friday, but now that we've been through the document so specifically, I want you to read through that again, because I think you'll hear it differently. It'll make better sense to you about what we're referencing and why we reference some pieces, so that you can have a confidence level that, for the most part, if you're using this script, you've now outlined and described the buyer contract well enough that you don't necessarily have to go line by line with the client. Some clients will ask you to go line by line. Some of you will feel better going line by line with the client. Those are decisions that you will make. However, I do believe that the outline that we give you, the close for the agreement, does cover the pieces of the contract well enough that if you choose, if no one has questions and you choose not to literally go line by line, you've now described each of the sections, you've described the obligations back and forth, and you haven't hidden from the fact that there are financial obligations and that there are some rules that we all follow outlined in this document. Make sense? All righty. So with the remainder of our time, what I would love to do is go through the anatomy of a buyer transaction, right? We spoke before about some tips and strategies to help you move people forward on the conversation of elimination, right? So how are you helping people whittle down the house that makes the best sense for you? So we're not going to go through that conversation all over again. I gave you some scripts to help buyers understand that if they find a house in the first day, that's okay. If they find a house in the first 2 weeks you're out, that's okay, right? We're going to encourage them to make offers there. We've talked about the top 5 must-have list and how you're utilizing that to keep buyers focused, and that will prompt you and them to have conversations about making offers. And so let's dive in to the anatomy of a buyer transaction. Again, I resent this earlier today, right around 4 o'clock, in case you didn't receive it on Friday. So you have that document in your email. Let's go through this the way we went through the anatomy of a seller transaction, starting with number 1. You're going to lead generate, right? We're right back, we're kind of going all the way back to you lead generating based on source of business from week number 1. You're going to get that appointment with the lead. You're going to consult the lead. convert them to a client, which means you're going to go through the buyer consultation and have them sign the buyer agreement. Number 4, you're going to make sure that they are able. Remember, we talked about having able, ready, and willing buyers. So make sure that they are able in writing to afford property. You're going to show homes and continue to consult them using the tools that we just talked about. And at some point, you're going to find the one. You're already going to find the property that they're going to say, wow, this is the one, we really want to buy this house. And so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to say, awesome, I'm so excited. Let's drive back to the office and do some work to get you the data that you need to move forward with an offer, right? And so you're going to make sure that you give them current data, market conditions data, comparable data, just like we did on the seller side. Remember those conversations we had on the seller side, and then the 3 best sold comps, right, that we had a conversation around? Well, when you work for the buyer, once they find the one, you need to go and produce that information for people on the buy side. They need to understand how fast or slowly the market is moving. They need to understand in that price range what the current month's supply of inventory is. They need to understand the best 3 sold comps. And oh, by the way, in the market that we're in today, you may also want to make sure that they understand average days on market. Is it going up or is it going down in the last 90 to 120 days? What's the average list to sale ratio, right? We talked about all these things as listing agents. I want to bring them back to the table because they're very important for you to understand as a buyer's agent, because all that information is relevant to how the buyer is going to make the offer. Make sense? I'll tell you, I looked at different conversations to have with my own purchases, right? Those of you that were on the 1 o'clock heard me say, I bought a house last weekend and I bought one yesterday, right? So the house I bought last weekend was brand new to the market, had come on. I saw it day 2, still didn't have any offers on it, paid full price with a ticking time bomb that said, if you don't answer in 5 hours, our offer's off the table, right? So I set some clear parameters to get an answer quickly so that they couldn't use my offer to just kind of sit around waiting for somebody else to come in and offer more. That was last weekend. Yesterday, Sunday, I went and saw the house on Saturday, made the offer on Sunday. It was something that had been on the market for about 2 weeks, went under agreement, came back because the buyers didn't perform, and had been on the market since Thursday or Friday, still no offers, and it was pretty relatively simple to get an appointment to see the property. So I put 2 and 2 together and said, okay, in the 10 days or the week or so in Waterbury, for whatever reason, the market's given me a little bit more room. So I didn't make a full price offer. I made an offer about 20K lower than asking, and got the house for that or a smidge more, right? So you need to know what's going on right then and there. I could have made the mistake of thinking that the market was the same as it was the weekend before for that particular house, and I would have overpaid by $19,000. Let me restate that. I would have paid $19,000 more. The reality is, for my purposes, am I happy I didn't have to pay the extra 19? Yes. Would it have changed the numbers and made it a bad investment if I had to pay the 19 more? No, because $19,000 in a mortgage, 75% of $19,000 in a mortgage doesn't all of a sudden make the property not profitable, right? So my point though is, market conditions told me how to behave. Market conditions told me what I could get away with and what I probably shouldn't the week before, right? So you have to arm your buyers with all that information, because once they find the house, what is the number one question that most buyers ask you almost immediately?
What do you think I can get it for? What should we offer?
Exactly right. What do you think I should write the offer for? Right? And the answer has to be, great question. Let's dig into the data. Let's help you by giving you the education that you need in the market to make a great decision, right? So that to me means month supply of inventory, list to sale ratio, right? If my buyers know that most properties in this price range, there's less than a month supply of inventory, the last 3 properties closed at or above asking price, and the list to sale ratio is 99.7% for the last 90 days, right? And they decide to make an offer of 425 on the 495 house. Okay, well, I understand. Let's go back and see how, like, what specific evidence exists to justify that particular offer, right? We have to help them get real about how they make the offer, and we do that with all that data. Number 7 is what we just talked about. Number 8, write up the offer for the client. You're going to make sure that the offer is complete, and that includes any kind of offer to purchase or contract that you're going to write, any kind of cover letter that you may put on top of that offer, outlining the terms or the bullet points of the offer. Remember, any cover letter that you write, you need to just send over to your buyers before you send it to the listing agent to make sure they okay it. Some agents I know actually have the seller write the cover letter directly. The buyer write the letter directly to the seller, right? So if they write it and they send it to you, great. You can use that. If you write it on their behalf, just make sure they proof it first and give you the thumbs up. A copy of a binder check, right? That can be 1%. It cannot be 1%, right? There's no law that says it has to be 1%. When I buy houses now, typically I'm putting 10% down with the contract, another 10%, another 15% at closing, and I'm financing 75% with my investment properties. Knowing full well that I'm going to come to the table with an extra 9% in a week or so anyway, I just skip that whole step. And I just write the check for 10% and push that money towards the seller. Because to me, that just shows that I'm a stronger buyer and I'm willing to put down more money, which means I'm more of a sure thing, right? I'm not worried that I'm going to flake out and lose some of that money or potentially put that money at risk. So I just write the full 10% and push that with the offer because I think it makes me look stronger. And then, of course, any and all disclosures, right? There should be property condition disclosure forms, lead disclosures if the house was built if the house was built after 1978, any kind of mortgage pre-qualification or pre-approval letter, or if it's cash, some kind of proof of funds, right? Any kind of addendum that might be inside of the MLS when you go to the document section of the MLS. When I buy investment properties, oftentimes there's a tenant disclosure where it outlines who has what lease and what numbers there are that we have to sign, right? So look for that kind of package on the MLS under the documents for the listing, print all that out and get all that signed. So that's the whole package. Do yourself a favor, have a little bit of a checklist right here and just make sure that you've got everything, because the last thing you want to do is leave stuff out, send it over to the listing agent, have the listing agent come back and say, I'm not going to submit this till it's complete. That just starts to erode confidence in you by the listing agent, right? And sometimes the listing agent then shares that erosion of confidence in you with the seller, and it puts your folks at a disadvantage, right? So all these things end up being really important, making sure that you have a full, complete offer and that all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. Make sense? Please note 8H says do not include the buyer agreement. Sometimes listing agents ask for it. They have no right to receive a copy of it. That's a document between you and your buyer and the brokerage, right? The listing agent doesn't need a copy of that. So you can, if they ask for it, you can simply say, thank you so much, but that's a confidential document between the buyers and I. I'm curious, why would you be asking for it, right? Ask them what they need. If there's some additional piece of information they need, you can perhaps share that if it doesn't breach confidentiality, but they don't need the buyer agreement. Number 9, present the offer to the listing agent. If geography permits, deliver the offer to the listing agent in person. If not, scan it and email it to the listing agent. If you're scanning and emailing, if it were me, I would call, which is different than texting or emailing. So I'm going to call Donna and say, hey, Donna, it's Rick Scott. I just wanted to let you know that offer I thought I might be writing on 123 Main Street, did in fact get written. I'm emailing that right now. You can expect it in the next 5 or 10 minutes. And then excuse me, I didn't finish my conversation with Donna. If you could please confirm to me when you've received it, I would appreciate it. And so then I push the button, and if Donna doesn't confirm to me in 5 or 10 minutes that she's got it, I call her back. Hey, Donna, it's Rick. I'm just curious. Did you receive that? Hey, while I have you on the phone, now that you've seen it, could we maybe just review it real quick in case you had any questions? And I will tell you that there's a ton of real estate agents out there right now who do everything with their thumbs and pushing buttons, and then don't follow up. There's no face-to-face communication or phone-to-phone communication around the offer. And guys, I will tell you, I firmly believe that is a disservice to your buyer client. Right? You need to be involved in pushing all the great aspects of this offer, and you can do that best in person. Right? If Donna's going to take a moment and open that up and review it with her eyeballs, she can kind of say whatever she wants to say. She can ask me questions about it. And now we're having a dialogue around the offer. And I also know she received it, right? I can't tell you how many times people come to me and say, Rick, I need your help. I don't know what to do. I think I need you to call the broker. I say, okay, what's going on? Well, I sent an offer in on last Wednesday, and I have no response back. And I said, you have no response back, right? I mean, what do you mean by no response? Well, I sent the offer. I don't even know if they received it. Oh, okay, it's Monday. Like, what are you talking about? You don't even know if they received it. I can almost see if they received it and if the conversation is they haven't gotten back with any kind of counter. Now, again, that's way too long. We're gonna get to that in a second. But you don't even know if they received it? Well, how many times have you called? Well, what do you mean? I sent it to them. She didn't call me back. No. That's not how this works. Nice try. That's not how this works, right? I had the same thing occur this morning. I had someone who asked me to speak to his attorney, and I agreed that if he would give me in writing permission to speak to his attorney instead of him, I'd be happy to do that. I said, but here's what I need you to understand. Your attorney is going to have to call me. I said, okay, I'll have that done. He texted me this morning and said, I'm furious. You haven't spoken to my attorney. That's right. Your attorney hasn't called me. I told you to have your attorney call me. They didn't do that. It's not now my responsibility to follow up and say, hey, attorney, are you going to call me? Right? And maybe that sounds like a weird example to give because it sounds backwards. In that scenario, you are the attorney. As the buyer's agent, you're the attorney. You have the obligation to follow up and make those phone calls. Does that make sense? Remember, it's your job to present the offer excitedly as it has been written by the client. So if this is not the place for an editorial, if I have a conversation with Donna and Donna says, what are you kidding me? That's the offer? How am I even supposed to pick up the phone and deliver this to the seller? It's low. They want a long closing date. They're financing like $1 bazillion. Are you kidding me? Let me ask you this. Does that sometimes happen with listing agents? Yes, not you as listing agents, because that's not how you behave. And yet sometimes you will have a listing agent who pushes your buttons about it. Remember, it's your job to present the offer excitedly as it was written, not the place for an editorial, which means if Donna gives me that information, my answer is not, oh, look, trust me, I am right there with you. I told them to make a better offer. They didn't listen. It's not my number. Don't shoot the messenger. Let's see, I'm sure we can do something, maybe. No. That's not how you need to do that, right? If Donna gives me that kind of an answer, my answer has to simply be, yes, it's a strong offer based on current comparables, and we're excited to present it. I would encourage you to present that excitedly to the seller, and let's see where it goes. Simple answer, right? Simple answer. And oh, by the way, it's better than the offer you had an hour ago. Right? Because sometimes Sometimes people get all bent out of shape about the offer on a house that's been sitting there for 30 days. Like, really? How about we just have the clients make these decisions, right? Not us. Number 10, ask the listing agent when you might expect to hear back from them. That's a really important piece. I'm going to ask Donna before I let her off the phone. I'm curious, Donna, when do you think we'll hear back from your seller clients? And Donna's going to give me a time, right? If it's 6:38 at night when we're having this conversation, she may say, you know what? I should be able to get back to you before 8 o'clock. They should be home shortly. I'm going to drive over there and have a meeting. I'm going to call them. I'm going to Zoom them, whatever it's going to happen. I should have an answer for you by 8 o'clock. Great. Thank you so much. If by 10 to 8, I haven't heard from Donna, I'm going to pick up the phone again and make that phone call, because I've said to the buyer clients, I was told we should have an answer by 8 o'clock. And so I'm going to call Donna back. Hey, it's Rick. I know it's a little early. I know I'm a pest, but any word back? Yes, I'm so sorry. I just finished another appointment. I do have, let's have that conversation. Or no, somebody got called to the emergency room because the kid fell and cut their arm or whatever. And I think it's going to have to be tomorrow morning. Okay, excellent. I'm going to give a call to the buyers and make sure that's okay with them, right? Now I'm managing expectations on the buyer side, right? But with Donna, I'm having a communication. Don't think that just because Donna doesn't call me back, she doesn't have an answer. That has not been my experience. More times than not, when Donna doesn't call me back when she said she was going to call me back, it's because something else is going on. Right? And I hate to sound paranoid about that, but especially with a market that's moving as fast as this one is, you need to continue to proactively advocate for your buyer clients. And that might mean being a little bit of a pest. If there's one thing that I have done, I've perfected in the last 21 years, it's how to be a pest and not a jerk, right? Because the two things don't necessarily have to go hand in hand. I can be a pest because I want to be helpful. I can be a pest and still be cheery about it, right? By simply calling it out. Hey, Donna, it's Pesty Rick again. I know this is my third phone call, and I am so sorry about that. Understand I have anxious clients. I'm certain you understand that of all people, right? With the level of business that you do. And so I'm going to compliment, and I'm going to make sure that Donna knows that I know I'm being a pest. Instead of taking an attitude, I simply don't understand agents who think the best way to get something done is by having a defensive or nasty attitude. Like, what is that? Like, didn't your grandmother ever tell you get more with honey than you do with vinegar? Or is that just my grandmother? Right, so recognize there's a way to be a pest. There's a way to be persistent without being jerky about it. And it's a skill you just have to continue to develop, right? If you naturally come across as hard or kind of unfeeling, and I do, I come across as typically as aggressive. I have to remember that and remember to soften my tone. I have to bring that down a little bit, right? And kind of add some words in there. Instead of calling Donna and saying, where are we? Right? And she's like, okay, like, who is this? Like, right? And you have no more than 3 words to say to me. So I get to soften that a little bit. You get the point, right? Monitor the response from the sellers. Do not assume that since you haven't heard back that there's no answer, right? We just talked about that. If you haven't heard back, make another phone call. Remember that buyers are anxious. I'm a professional buyer, which means I buy investment properties. As 50% of my living comes from that business, right? And so I do that for a living. I have very objective criteria about what I purchase. If I don't get a house, it's not the end of my planet. And having said all of that, when I have an offer out and I'm waiting for a response, I'm anxious because I wouldn't have made the offer if I didn't want to own that house. And so if I'm anxious, and I'm one of the most objective people that you'll probably ever meet in your life, imagine how your clients who are subjective and really wanting to live in that house and picturing their kids growing up there in the backyard and the soccer that can be played and all the stuff, right? Imagine how anxious they are. And so remember that your job, if you look at the end of number 11, you have to quell the buyer's anxiety by being over communicative. I will tell you that I don't think I've ever had a buyer with an offer in tell me I called them too much. As a matter of fact, I would make it a game. I would call often enough that you feel like you're kind of risking them saying, okay, thank you so much for the call. And yet you, like literally it was 10 minutes ago. Like if you don't have anything, call me again at 7, right? Have them back you down rather than you making the mistake of not being over communicative, because it's so helpful to them to move through that process. And when you quell their anxiety, when you finally do have an answer, you have people who are more emotionally ready to listen and make business decisions because their anxiety has been quelled all along because you're doing that calming thing that you do, right? So now they're more open to having a business focused conversation. When a response does come through in number 12, take the information down and then communicate that information back to the client objectively. This is also not the place for an editorial. And here's what I mean by that. Hey, Margaret, it's Rick. Well, all that work we did, almost looks like it's for naught, because I don't know what is wrong with these people, but their counter was like ridiculous, like almost non-existent. I mean, they counted us like with $1,000. I mean, can you believe it? The house has been on the market for 20 days, and that's how they treat us. I mean, I don't know what you want to do, but I am beyond furious with these people. Now, it's funny, except I don't have to make up overhearing that kind of answer. Do you see that by adding your editorial in there, you are shooting yourself and the buyer in the foot? They take cues from you, guys. And so when you come back like Eeyore about their offer, do you actually think they're going to be like, oh, great, let's talk about our counter. Let's see what we're going to do. Let's talk strategy. Let's figure it out. I'm still so excited about this house. No, they're going to be like, wah, wah, right? If your goal is to create Charlie Brown's teacher out of your client, well, that's a perfect way to do it. Instead of going back and saying, hey, Margaret, great news. We do have a counter from the seller. We are taking steps forward. And I'd like to review kind of what they said. What they said was they're going to, instead of $495, they're willing to sell the house for $494. And they liked the closing date. So they like to keep that closing date, and they'd like $494 for the property instead. Everything else seemed awesome, which is great, right? And so I know your offer was down was at as $475, and so now we have a little bit of a gap to close. And so I'm curious, where do you think you'd like to go in order to close the gap and or get an acceptance? I'm curious, is $494 an acceptable number for you to pay to be in that house? And Margaret says, well, no, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more. Got it. And so where were you kind of hoping they were going to come down to? Well, I was hoping they would come down to, like 487. Okay, great. And so knowing that that's where you were hoping, is that a place that you would choose to move to? Could we bring that 487 back and see if they're willing to say yes to 487, right? You see how it's a whole different conversation? It's positive, it's strategic, it's not like Debbie Downer. So make sure that you stay as objective as possible and that you continue to communicate in the way that you want to see the result come out.
Can I ask a related question? Sorry, Rick.
Of course, absolutely.
So in this market, which of course is crazy, but there are some houses that it does seem like it's slowing a little bit. So I've got a house that I did an open house on Sunday, and it is a strange layout. There were some weird things about it, but I had actually two buyers who said, yeah, we want to make an offer, but they were suggesting like $100,000 under asking. So I just, I tried to be neutral. I said, well, that is a big disparity. Let's talk and let's, I don't know if they accept that, but of course we can always offer, you know what I mean? Like, but I wanted to be like $100,000 less, you know what I mean? I was trying to be neutral. How would you respond to that given the way the market is?
Sure, great question. And the path forward that I would use, I would stay neutral and let data do the heavy lifting for you, right? And so if they say, oh, we love this one, but instead of $6.99, we want to offer $5.99, you can get to say, okay, well, we're gonna head back to the office and we're gonna pull some data. I want you to see what the market's doing. I want you to see what the best 3 sold comps are, because just like your bank's appraiser is going to utilize this data to help justify your loan, the seller is looking at the same information and has certain expectations on their side. So let's kind of see what the market is telling us about what is likely here, right? Because there's 2 versions of an offer, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. There's probable and possible, right? You guys may notice that I like scripts that have, like, there's the 2 Q's, there's the 2 P's, right? The 2 P's is probable and possible. And so Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, there's probable and there's possible. In order to position you for the win, we want to make sure that you're moving forward with decisions that put you in the realm of what is probable, not just in the realm of what is possible, right? Anything's possible. And yet based on the data that we're going to review, you're going to have a very clear picture of what is probable, right? And so then I would show them list to sale ratio. I would show them the best sold comps. I would show them days on market. I would have had a conversation with them when we started, right? Assuming that you started in the last, couple of months, that was the expectation. That if they're looking for a bargain, they probably won't find it here, right? We don't have those kinds of things going on right now, right?
Yeah, these were just people who walked in the door, so I hadn't had a history with them to talk
Got
about.
it.
Yeah.
Got it. Right, and so then let the numbers do the heavy lifting for you, right? And ask questions, review the numbers, and then always ask questions. Don't tell them, ask them. Based on all that data, where do you think the probable number is in order for the sellers to say yes to this particular house? I'm curious, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, are you only interested in this house at a massive discount off of market value, or are you interested in this house, period? Right? Because that's two different things, right? Number 13, in communicating information back to the client, advise them that they always have 3 options. I think this is like the most powerful tool on the planet, and it's ARM, right? Accept, reject, modify. Accept, reject, modify. And so every single time the ball is back in your court with your client, I want you to remind them that they have the power of ARM, right? So they make an offer and they get a counter, right? You're on the buyer side. They get a counter. You're going to remind them. So I want to remind you that you are in complete control of this transaction, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, because you are armed with ARM, and that stands for accept, reject, or modify. You can say yes to what the seller has said. You can outright reject it, and we can go find you a different house. Or that M is modify, right? We can kind of figure out a middle ground and go back and see if we have another bite at the apple. I'm curious, based on your desire to live in that house and the market conditions data that we reviewed, which do you choose, accept, reject, or modify? And they get to make a choice. If they say accept, great. I'll let the listing agent know. We'll re-sign a new offer and we'll get that documentation. If they say reject, great. Talk to me about that decision to outright reject. Talk to me about what's driving that decision, right? I want to know why they're just walking away without playing the game anymore. And if modify, great. Based on the market conditions conversation that we just had and your desire to live in that house, tell me what your thoughts are about a modification. Where do you think you'd like to go? And then they get to make those decisions. You get to support them and move it all forward. Now, just flipping hats real quick, if you're on the listing side, I also encourage you to use ARM every single time, right? When the initial offer comes in, as the listing agent, you're going to say to the sellers, hey, so here's the offer. You're going to go through the offer the way we talked about last week. And then you get to say, the good news, after they have any questions, the good news is, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you're in complete control of this negotiation because you have ARM. You can accept or modify. The initial time, if you remember, as listing agent, I didn't allow my sellers not to just reject the offer outright. So for them, they had AM, right? But the accept, reject, modify, it works the same way. Yes, Sydney.
Hey, Rick, thanks for taking my question. So I had a buyer over the weekend, or actually last Thursday, and we looked at comps, and I thought the number that she brought up a number that she thought she wanted to offer. It wasn't completely out of line, I didn't think, based on the comps, but it was a little lower than what I would have recommended to her. So I didn't push her hard in either direction, but I told her, this would be my recommendation, and it was like $5,000 higher than what she had proposed as a potential offer. Do you think, in that scenario, do you even recommend like telling them they should go slightly higher, or just completely let them go on their own instinct based on the data?
Yeah, so great question. And the answer is it depends. And the reason the answer is it depends is because it kind of depends on what the data is telling us, right? And so if you go back to the two examples I gave you, the houses I bought in Waterbury, 10 days ago, the data told me I needed to move quickly and not screw around. I didn't go over asking because I knew that nobody else was on the table. So I went in right at asking. I waived a bunch of things, and I put a time period, a time frame, a ticking clock on it, right? 10 days later, when I went and looked at market conditions again, it seemed like things had taken a slight tick down. And so I thought I had a little bit more room, right? So if I were now the client looking at that data, I would ask that client some questions. Based on the market conditions data that we just reviewed, what do you think the probability is that they will say yes to the number that you're putting on the table? And I'm curious, knowing that the market's moving relatively swiftly, are you okay if all of a sudden you're first in and then you're followed by two additional offers? In that scenario, oftentimes we find in multiple offer situations that somebody's at asking price, somebody's above it, and somebody's below it. I'm curious, are you okay being the one that's below it? Again, I don't know what the scenario was, but so it kind of depends on where the numbers are pointing. The simple answer to your question is, I would always encourage people to recognize that you may not get a second bite at the apple, especially when the market's moving quickly. And to help them understand that as they're making the offer, I think is part of the job. Not to freak them out or scare them, but to say something like, so Sydney, one of the things I just want to be clear about based on, again, what the market's doing and what the market conditions are supporting is that sometimes offers are submitted and we don't get a second bite at that apple, which means the sellers don't come back with some kind of a response. They may be receiving additional offers and just choose somebody else's. So with that, is there any amount of money that you would regret not putting on the table up front if in fact that scenario occurred to you? Because I just don't want you to resent any decision that you make today. And sometimes they say, oh, well, in that case, maybe I'll put an extra 10 down. Or sometimes they say, you know what, if they come back and they go with somebody else, I'm fine with that. Excellent. But then at least we've had the conversation so that if it does happen, let me make this statement as well. As buyer's agents, especially in a market that's moving very swiftly, please don't promise a process that you have no control over. And so what that means is if buyers ask you, or sometimes I hear agents just kind of volunteering these things, don't worry about your offer because whenever the counter comes back, we'll just keep negotiating. Don't worry, the seller will come back. Don't worry, don't worry. I'm going to tell you what, I wouldn't be saying don't worry to my clients nowadays. Or I would be saying it, but I'd be saying things like, I'd be saying worry. right? That's the advice I give myself as a buyer. Worry that if you want to live in that house, and we're going to talk on Wednesday about multiple offer situations and some scripts and some strategies that I have for you for multiple offers, because it's so prevalent right now. But Sydney, does that answer that, at least in a kind of vague way?
Yeah, it does, certainly. Thank you, Rick.
Okay, sure. And actually, number 14 gives you another version of that answer, right? Counsel your client, understanding that their goal is to be in that house, right? They said to you, I want to live there. So to me, now it's my job to help them strategically get there. I never worried about the buyer client feeling like I was being pushy, because as I've said to you guys 100 times, I am aggressive, and I'm aggressive on your behalf. And I would say that flat out to clients. I say it to people I coach. I say it to clients. I say it to myself when I'm trying to convince myself what the best strategy forward is. I am aggressive on your behalf. And so if they want to be in that house, there's a certain strategy that I'll walk you through on Wednesday that will win them the house, even if there's multiple offers. Right? Don't make assumptions about their ability or not. Don't make assumptions about where they think they might want to end up. Because frankly, it's not your money, it's their money, right? Be careful that you're not saying things like, oh, I don't want you to overpay for this house. How do you know they don't want to overpay for the house? Right? That's not your decision. Your decision is to help them figure out a baseline like market conditions, and then talk about the what if. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, knowing that the market conditions say the probability is that the house will be here, and you're looking to go over by $30,000, the only risk you run is that if A, you may have appraisal issues, although those have kind of ironed themselves out of late, and B, you may, if you choose to sell the house in a short period of time, 2 or 3 years, you may not necessarily get back the money that you put in. Are you okay with those potential risks? Yes, great. Then let's go. Right? Instead of, oh my goodness, I could never have you overpay for this house. Well, that's not your decision. I'll tell you a story on Wednesday when I bought my last house that everyone and their sister was telling me I was paying way too much. Oh my goodness, that was so frustrating for me. Like, please don't tell me how to spend my money. Like, please. I'll tell you that story on Wednesday. All right, guys, I think we are out of time. We are, look at that, we're out of time. So put a line under number 14. We're gonna cruise through the rest of the buyer transaction, the anatomy buyer transaction on Wednesday. We'll talk a little bit about multiple offer strategies. I'll answer any questions on anything that you might have from any of our time together. And I will take the last 20 minutes of class and tell you my cat house story so that we end. It's become tradition that we end our Ignite time together with the cat house story. So I will give you that. For those of you who have taken Ignite before, it's worth it. It's worth sticking around for the cat house story. So with that, I will bid you good night. Have a lovely evening. Don't forget, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock is the monthly recognition and awards Zoom call. So tune in for 9 a.m. and see who's rocking out, and we'll see you then. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.